Okay, so we've spent the last 10 weeks in the book of Ezekiel, and tonight we're taking a big bite, but you're going to see in a moment why we're doing that. I'm going to give you a sample of what the last part of the book of Ezekiel sounds like, and you'll be thankful that we're doing a big bite in chapters 40 through 48. And that brings us to the last section of the literary design of Ezekiel. You'll see down here, chapters 40 through 48, God's presence is going to return to his people, resulting in a new creation. But the way Ezekiel is going to do this is he's going to communicate it through the detail of a new temple vision. And I'm going to give you an example of this. I found a video that we're going to look at, and it's like 5 minutes long. What I want to do, if you want to open to chapter 40 of Ezekiel, against the backdrop of this video, which is kind of a 3D tour of this new temple if it was actually being constructed. And I just want you to kind of get a feel for how this section in chapters 40 through 48 reads. And then I'll double back and pick out a few little things that I think are notable in this section that we should be aware of. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to watch this video, and I'm going to kind of read the text as this video is displaying it. So we'll go that route, and hopefully, I did not practice this, so hopefully this goes okay. So here we go. We're going to watch the video and listen to chapter 40 of Ezekiel. In the 25th year of our exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after the city was struck down, on that very day, the hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me there. He brought me in visions of God to the land of Israel and set me down on a very high mountain on which was a structure like a city to the south. And when he brought me there, a man was there whose appearance shone like the bronze, with a linen cord and a measuring reed in his hand, and he was standing in the gateway. The man said to me, Mortal, look closely and listen attentively, and set your mind upon all I will show you. For you were brought here in order that I might show you, declare all that you see to the house of Israel. Now there was a wall all around the outside of the temple area. The length of the measuring reed in the man's hand was 6 cubits long, being a cubit and a handbreadth in length. So it measured the thickness of the wall, one reed, and the height, one reed. And then he went into the gateway facing east, going up its steps, and measured the threshold of the gate, one reed deep. There were recesses, and each recess was one reed wide and one reed deep, and the space between the recesses 5 cubits. And the threshold of the gate by the vestibule of the gate at the inner end was one reed deep. Then he measured the inner vestibule of the gateway 1 cubit, and then he measured the vestibule of the gateway 8 cubits, and its pilasters 2 cubits, and the vestibule of the gate was at the inner end. There were 3 recesses on either side of the east gate, and the 3 were of the same size, and the pilasters on each side were of the same size. Then he measured the width of the opening of the gateway 10 cubits, and the width of the gateway 13 cubits. There was a barrier before the recesses, 1 cubit on either side, and the recesses were 6 cubits on either side. Then he measured the gate from the back of the one recess to the back of the other, a width of 25 cubits from wall to wall. He measured back of the other at a width of 25 cubits from also the vestibule, 20 cubits, and the gate next to the pilaster on each side of the court. From the front of the gate at the entrance to the end of the inner vestibule of the gate was 50 cubits. The recesses and their pilasters had windows with shutters on the inside of the gateway all around, and the vestibules also had windows on the inside all around, and on the pilasters were palm trees. Then he brought me into the outer court. There were chambers there and a pavement all around the court, 30 chambers fronted on the pavement. The pavement ran along the side of the gates, corresponding to the length of the gates. This was the lower pavement. And then he measured the distance from the inner front of the lower gate to the outer front of the inner court, 100 cubits. And then he measured the gate of the outer court that faced north, its depth and width, its recesses, 3 on either side, and its pilasters and its vestibule were on the same size as of the first gate. Its depth was 50 cubits and its width 25 cubits. Its windows, its vestibule, and the palm trees were of the same size as those of the gate that faced toward the east. 7 steps led up to it, and its vestibule was on the inside. Opposite the gate on the north, as on the east, was a gate to the inner court. He measured from gate to gate 100 cubits. And then he led me toward the south, and there was a gate on the south, and he measured its pilasters and its vestibule, and they had the same dimensions as the others. There were windows all around in it, and in its vestibule, like the windows of the others, its depth was 50 cubits, and its width 25 cubits. There were 7 steps leading up to it. Its vestibule was on the inside. It had palm trees on its pilasters, 1 on either side. And there was a gate on the south of the inner court, and he measured it from gate to gate toward the south, 100 cubits. And then he brought me out to the inner court by the south gate, and he measured the south gate. It was the same dimension as the others. Its recesses, its pilasters, and its vestibules were the same size as the others, and there were windows all around in it. And in its vestibule, its depth was 50 cubits, and its width 25 cubits. There were vestibules all around, 25 cubits deep and 5 cubits wide. Its vestibule faced the outer court, and palm trees were on its pilasters, and its stairway had 8 steps. And then he brought me to the inner court on the east side, and he measured the gate. It was of the same size as the other. Its recesses, its pilasters, its vestibule were all the same dimension as the others, and there were windows all around it, and in its vestibule, its depth was 50 cubits, and its width 25 cubits. Its vestibule faced the outer court, and it had palm trees on its pilasters on either side, and its stairway had 8 steps. Then he brought me to the north gate, and he measured it, and he had the same dimension as the others. Its recesses, its pilasters, and its vestibule were of the same size as the others, and had windows all around. It was 50 cubits, and its width 25 cubits. Its vestibule faced the outer court, and it had palm trees on its pilasters. So I didn't finish that. I got behind. That video was going a lot quicker than I could read. But I think you get a feel for what it is doing in this chapter and in the chapters that follow. So what is going on here? I hope you noticed a couple of things as I was reading it. It was, number one, very redundant in its details. Number two, it was using a lot of multiples of 5. 25, 50, 100, that type of thing. So here's a few takeaways in this section that I want you to think about. So in the design of this scroll, this temple vision is really linking you back to chapters 1 through 8. So if you remember the first vision that Ezekiel had by the river Kebar, there was a movement toward God's glory leaving the temple, okay? And then he goes on to all of this type of communication through sign acts and parables and that type of thing. And now we're coming back, and what's going to happen, and we'll turn to this in a little bit, in chapter 43, the glory of God comes back to the temple. Now, the passages are very detailed in its dimensions, but it is interesting that all of the dimensions are speaking of its width and its length. The overall vertical dimensions of the temple are not found. And that's an interesting thing. It's kind of a horizontal plane, and there's a potential reason for that I'll get to in a moment. So God gave detailed instructions to Moses to build the tabernacle and later the temple. David wanted to build a temple. Solomon will end up building the temple. And what we find here is Ezekiel is kind of completing this vision that God dwells in the tabernacle and the temple. And I think what's happening in this section is Ezekiel is portraying the future of this covenant people that whose experience of God was centered in the temple complex. Now, the way it's being done in Ezekiel is as if a priest is walking through the temple precinct, and you're seeing this temple through the priest's imagination. Now, remember, Ezekiel, before he became a prophet, he was a priest. And so, what we're seeing taking place is Ezekiel as a priest is kind of giving us a description of what the temple is like through his eyes in the office of a priest. The other parts of Ezekiel, he's more prophetical in his approach. So I mentioned that the glory of God left the temple, and now it's going to return in chapter 43. But the other thing that is interesting is the way when you get to the allotment of the land around the temple, is that the city has become kind of decentralized in the original setting of the 12 tribes. They did not have equal portions of land. They were given pieces of land that correspond to their population. Here, though, that's done away with, and what we find is more of a complete um, uh, equity, if you will, of land distribution. The number 25 is very prominent in this description. And the reason I think it is because it is the year that Ezekiel gives this vision of the temple. They are 25 years into the exile, okay? The other reason is half of the 50-year Jubilee cycle is 25. And it seems as though the Israelites that never kept the year of Jubilee is now being given this understanding of God's vision all along of how he sees justice being carried out in the land. So maybe I can give you a couple of analogies that will help. So first, picture this map of the United States, okay? So you can see unequal land distribution. Texas has a lot, California has a lot, Montana has a lot, but the East Coast is all very small portions of property, and yet that is where a lot of population is along the East Coast. So when you look at a map of the United States, you might say that the way it developed from its beginning is that those who moved west began to acquire more land as they moved west than those initial settlers into the United States. So the current lines of the states and their borders represents not a decision of a person really that sat down and drew up these border lines. It's a long process of land acquisition, different political, economic, and social interests that kind of shaped the states in the way they are divided up. Now, if you can imagine a modern day Ezekiel kind of coming to the United States and using this map, he would say, well, a lot of this territory here was based upon some of the resources that were involved, like the oil down in Texas and some of the other things, the gold out in California. And what pushed a lot of it was greed and corruption, and that the equivalent American vision that would result on a map when justice was done is not that the capital of the United States would be over here in Washington, D.C. It would be in the middle of the country because it would represent the place of a proportionate design for the capital of the country. So that would place the capital of the country somewhere, I imagine, around Nebraska. But anyways, um, that's just an illustration. It seems as though the temple vision in Ezekiel is kind of re-envisioning the promised land and the way that the land should be shared among each other. Okay, a second analogy. So I don't know if anybody has ever done a meditative labyrinth. So there are different things that churches sometimes will do that you follow kind of a path, if you will, and you're supposed to stop and pray or read a portion of scripture. Next week, there's an illustration of that in the Stations of the Cross. You stop, you think, you pray, you meditate. Well, there's all kinds of different expressions of that. And on the top here is kind of an illustration of a Christian labyrinth, a kind of you start at a place and you walk a path. As you walk a path, you stop along the way and you think, you meditate, and you pray. What's interesting, though, is that's not just unique to Christianity. In Buddhism and Hinduism, there's a thing called mandala, which is at the centerpiece, kind of the divine nature or the cosmic center of the universe. And the geometric patterns around it surround it, and it's kind of a way to envision, if you will, the centerpiece of the earth, and in different traditions, like in Hindu and Buddhism, the mandala is an object of meditation. It's to help in one's spiritual development. So these are two analogies of that. You have that expressed in churches. So Esty works down at Church of the Covenant in University Circle, and guess what they have? They have that very same thing in what they call a rose window. In the center of the rose window is usually some type of symbolic piece, usually a cross. If you can see that, that's what's in the middle of that window there. It's called the Rose Window. There's a lot of churches that have something similar to that. And it's almost kind of like a form of a mandala, that you're supposed to look upon it, you're supposed to think about it, you're supposed to envision it. And as you contemplate it, you look to the center of it. And here it's a cross, but sometimes in the rose windows, there might be an image of Christ or the Virgin Mary. In the case of the Church of the Covenant, the story of the Gospels are told in the stained glass on each side of the sanctuary. So all of this is very symbolic. It's meaningful for those who are a little bit mystical and want to meditate and to ponder. So you can even see the wood carving in the front of the altarpiece there, depicting various expressions of the ministry of Christ. That, I think, is what is happening in Ezekiel 40 through 48. I think it is giving a vision for the people to contemplate. And there's three sections to chapters 40 through 48. In the first section, God returns to the purified temple to dwell among his people. That's chapters 40 through 43. In 44 through 46, you find a purified priesthood, and you find a liturgy that is restoring worship to God in covenant fidelity. And then lastly, in chapters 47 and 48, Israel is restored to the land that they lost in their exile, but it is a reorganized piece of territory. And what we find is that the vision of it is kind of, this is God's renewed creation, where there is no one that is left out, that there is the expression of all that are belonging. So hopefully that makes some sense. So let's break it down. So notice these three things. These are the 3 points I'm going to make. God returns to the purified temple to dwell among his people. So God comes back, and what we find is Ezekiel is given a visionary tour. It's almost as if there is a real estate agent or a surveyor there. And the vision that is here is again a vision of a man in bronze. And you'll take a look, it's at the beginning here. I saw a man whose appearance was like bronze. That's verse 3. And he was standing in the gateway with a linen cord and a measuring rod in his hand. So here's this individual, unnamed at this point, that is taking Ezekiel into this meditative expression of a temple and leading him around and pointing things out. So now Ezekiel declares what is being seen. And in chapter 40, you have at the beginning it occurring in the 25th year of our exile. So Ezekiel's dating this vision from the time of that first vision in chapter 1. And this is a time that took him into exile, and he's there for about 10 years. And then Nebuchadnezzar goes back into Jerusalem and destroys the temple about 15 years later, which is in 586 BCE. If you add that up, it's 25 years from the time that he is given this vision and he is taken into the land of Babylon. Now, what is happening, most scholars believe that the year 25 also corresponds to half of the Jubilee cycle. So every 50th year, something is to happen. The land is to go back to its original owners, and they are to be freed from the debt that has accumulated over the 5 decades. Now, there is no historical notation that Israel ever actually did that. But in the law, that's what was designed to bring equity back to the people who get into debt. Perhaps they were sold into slavery, and that type of thing. So if you add all this together, this is really 25 years after the first vision, which took place when Ezekiel was about 30 years old. So it's approximately around his 50 to 55 year birthday age. And that is also the time, according to the law, that priests needed to kind of step down from their role as priests. So it's kind of like their retirement was not 65 or 70, it was around 50 to 55 years of age. So this number 25 becomes significant. And I read for you a portion of chapter 40, and you can look at this if you wanted to really look at it in detail. You'll find that a multiple of 5 or 7 is found throughout the chapter. So you'll notice that if the vision happens in the 25th year of the exile, it's interesting that the entry gates are 25 cubits wide and 2 times 25 long. And so you can see the corresponding verses that are there. And then what you have is when you add all of it up, the number 25 becomes kind of like the center square of this geometric pattern of 500 cubic squares. So it looks kind of like this. So if you had all of these descriptions of the outer walls and the inner walls, and in multiples of 5 times 5 here, 25, The middle circle is where the altar is. Okay, so it's very symbolic in the sense that what is the centerpiece of the temple? It's the altar. Okay, and that's the most important piece in the life of the nation of Israel. So, what is the purpose of all this? Remember that they are taken into exile primarily because they defiled the temple. And as they defiled the temple, God abandons it. He leaves, his glory leaves it. And what caused them to defile the temple? Ezekiel has said this several times over. It's because there's no justice, there's idolatry, there's violence, and even some of the kings of Judah um, would elevate their status by being buried close to the temple precinct. The symmetry of the temple, the order of it, and the proper function of it is to bring back a reminder that God will come back if you get your priorities in order and not make this about power, prestige, uh, privilege, money, riches, all that type of thing. So he wants to purify a corrupt religion. So then in chapters 40 through 48, you have these three sacred zones. One is the temple and its place within the city of Jerusalem. The second is the temple along the portion alongside the temple in the city. And the walls are very symbolic and important even to this day in the life of Israel. There's still a portion of the temple walls standing, and it's called the Wailing Wall, where people write down their prayers and place them into the cracks on a daily basis. And then finally, the land surrounding the temple that the 12 tribes were to share in. And so remember that the land was kind of divided up. After Joshua takes the people into the promised land, it is taken uh, in a way that the land is kind of assigned according to the importance of the tribe and to the size of the tribe. So it seems as though the purpose of this temple vision is to declare to the exiles that God is giving a perfect proportion to who's able to be involved in the temple and who is able to be close to God. Now, when you read this, so let's go over to chapter 43 for just a quick second here. So, chapter 40 talks about the outer court, the north gate, the south gate, the inner court, even the rooms for the priests, and so forth. And then you get to chapter 43, and it begins, Then the man brought me to the gate facing east, and I saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east, and his voice was like the roar of rushing waters, and the land was radiant with his glory. The vision I saw was like the vision I had seen when he came to destroy the city, and like the visions I had seen by the Kebar River, and I fell face down. And the glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east. And then the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. And while the man was standing beside me, I heard someone speaking to me from inside the temple. He said, Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place for the soles of my feet. This is where I will live among the Israelites forever. Now, when you begin to look at this, what you find here is that this plan is really this idea of a proportion that is given to all the people. And so, if you're to read it close, if you come down to verses 10 and 11 in the same chapter, it says, Son of man, describe the temple to the people of Israel that they may be ashamed of their sins. Let them consider the plan. And that's a Hebrew word, toknik, And it is translated here in the NIV plan, um, but it might be better translated, here's the perfect proportion. And if they are ashamed of all they have done, make known to them the design of the temple, its arrangement, its exit and entrances, its whole design, and all its regulations and laws. Write these down before them so that they may be faithful to its design and follow all its regulations. This isn't just a physical blueprint. That's what this is trying to say. This is not a physical blueprint. It's a spiritual, perfect proportion of how the people and God share this same territory, and God dwelling among his people. So, what are the perfect proportions of the temple then? Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, you have horizontal measurements here, but there's a lack of vertical dimensions, which is interesting. It's not a blueprint, it is a symbol of the universal presence of God among all people. And I think that's kind of what is going on here. And in the center of it, um, you do have a vertical dimension. The great altar is going to be restored. So look at verse 13 in chapter 43. These are the measurements of the altar in long cubits, that cubit being a cubit and a handbreadth. Its gutter is a cubit deep and a cubit wide, with a rim of one span around the edge. And this is the height of the altar. So now we're given a vertical dimension here. So if you translate this into feet, it's about 10 feet tall and 34 feet square. There are stairs that lead up to it, and the great altar is being restored as a way of a climax of God's love and glory entering back into the life of the nation. So then you come to chapter 44 through 46, and now it gets to the nitty gritty of the priests, the Levites, and the priests. Now, the prince here, or the in this chapter, is who is this? Well, we're not really sure, but evidently this could relate back to the one that is leading Ezekiel into this this observing of the temple, into envisioning this. But what you have then is more instructions about the actual priesthood, the Levitical priesthood, in this section. When you get to chapter 47, I know I'm skipping over a lot, but you'll be thankful that I did, because this is the way this whole section reads. When you get to chapter 47, from the temple, there's an additional element. There's a river that is seen flowing from the temple. So in verse 1 of chapter 47, it says, "The man brought me back to the entrance of the temple, and I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the temple faced east. And the water was coming down from under the south side of the temple, south of the altar. And he then brought me out through the north gate and led me around to the outside to the outer gate facing east, and the water was flowing from the south side." Now, what's interesting is this description. Verse 3, "As the man went eastward, with a measuring line in his hand, he measured off 1,000 cubits. And then he led me through the water that was ankle deep. And then he measured off another 1,000 cubits and led me through water that was knee deep. And he measured off another 1,000 and led me through water that was up to the waist. Measured off another 1,000. But now it was a river that I could not cross, because the water had risen and was deep enough to swim in, a river that no one could cross. He asked me, 'Son of man, do you see this?' Then he led me back to the bank of the river, and when I arrived there, I saw a great number of trees on each side of the river. And he led me, and he said to me, 'This water flows toward the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah, where it enters the sea. And when it empties into the sea, the water there becomes fresh, and swarms of living creatures will live wherever the water flows. There will be large number of fish because the water flows there and makes the salt water fresh so that the river flows everywhere. And so where the river flows, everything will live. You know what this is? It's an imaginative um, re-envisioning of the Garden of Eden, and it's this river that flows through the Garden of Eden. Now, in the book of Revelation, the very last chapter of Revelation, there's the river of the water of life as well. All of this is very symbolic, and it's describing the presence of God and that God won't leave his people, and these people can trust in this God who's going to bring creation to a place of restoration and rejuvenation and so forth. So I just love the image. The river turns from a trickle into a mile wide river that's seen flowing into the desert of the Dead Sea region, making all things fresh and fruitful. And again, if you read this and then go back to Genesis 1 and 2, it's the same thing. God is bringing order and bringing renewal to that which was chaotic and dark. So, this vision here, if you read it, not in a way that, oh, this is something that we're still waiting to happen, a rebuilding of a physical structure. It's a beautiful symbolic expression of God wanting to enrich the world with his fertility and beauty and so forth. So after the river in chapter 47, the way the book ends is a reallotment of the boundaries of the land. So when you read through this, chapter 48 especially, you have the division of the land according to the tribes. Um, what is this all about? Well, it seems as though that the order and placement of the tribal division reflects that there's no one um, there's no one tribe that's more important than the others. There had been, because of the lion from the tribe of Judah, the expectation of a Davidic king, and that's coming from this one tribe, that they are more important than the others. But what we find is that there is an arrangement, though, and even though there's kind of in ancient thought an ancestral grading system, in other words, some of the tribes came from Jacob's concubines, Dan, Asher, Naphtali, and Gad, and they're placed further away from the sanctuary and that type of thing, where those that come from his two wives, those sons, were placed closer to the temple sanctuary. But if you look at this map here, if you actually read the measurements of uh, how this is described, you have here an even distribution of each landmass for now. It's kind of divided horizontally in the sense that there is expressions that are taking place here. Now, it doesn't look as though it's even, but what you find is while Judah is kind of still in the center along the Jordan River here and the temple area that was there, you don't have the same divisions from Joshua where some of these tribes have really small pieces of land. In other words, it is not something that might necessarily be exactly even, but it's close. And with that in mind, it is describing the importance of all the tribes. And it would be as if we took that map of the United States and say, well, you know what? Rhode Island and Vermont and some of these small states, they would be a lot better off if they had some of the square miles that Texas and California have. So if you were dividing the borders up a little bit more evenly, it would give these different states more opportunity because they have more resources at hand. And I think that's what's going on here at the end of the book. Again, this is not literal, though. This is all something that is envisioned in this vision given to Ezekiel. And so the expectation, I think, is the allocation is stressing something. And here's the three things I think it's probably trying to express. Number one, and I will read a couple of things here. In verses 13 and 14, it's emphasizing equality, okay? This is what the sovereign Lord says. These are the boundaries by which you are to divide the land for an inheritance among the 12 tribes of Israel, and the two portions for Joseph. You are to divide it equally among them, because I swore with uplifted hand to give it to your forefathers. This land will become your inheritance. So this artist that did this didn't make it exactly even in the way it's described here. But you saw in the verse that I just read that it's supposed to level things out. The other thing is the idea of security, that God will be among them, he'll be protecting them. The monarchy, the king will no longer abuse these tribes. And then when you come down to chapter 47, verse 21, it talks about the inclusion of even people outside of Israel. It says, you are to distribute this land among yourselves according to the tribes of Israel. You are to allot it as an inheritance for yourselves, and here we go, for the aliens who have settled among you and who have children. They are to have a place there as well, which is the idea of Gentiles or immigrants. You are to consider them as native-born Israelites. You're not to mistreat them. You're not to enslave them. You're not to coerce them. You're not to be violent against them. You are to consider them as native-born Israelites along with you. They are to be allotted an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. In whatever tribe the alien settles, there you're to give him his inheritance, declares the sovereign Lord. Oh boy, those who want to control landmass would not be happy with this. What? We're going to give land away. We're going to give resources away. We're going to give farming opportunities to people who are not Israelite born. So here you see a vision all around of God returning back to his people. The thing I want to remind you of here is when you listen to pastors that talk about the Middle East, and they talk about Israel has to rebuild a temple before Christ will come back and establish his kingdom. That is based on a very literal reading of this section of Ezekiel. There's some problems with that, and here's what they are. Here's four of them. There's really no basis for that in the New Testament. That's based mostly on Ezekiel. Number two, in the depiction of the new creation at the end of Revelation, it's clear that there is no centralized temple because the entire creation is filled with God's presence. Number three, the Gospels portray Jesus as the ultimate reality to which the physical temple is pointing to. And then you find that in John chapter 2, verse 13 and following. And then finally, number four, the rest of the New Testament portrays that the body of Christ, his people, men and women, boys and girls, Jews and Gentiles, this community of followers of Jesus is the temple. And there's all kinds of scriptural cross references that emphasize that. You are the body of Christ. You are the temple of the Holy Spirit, that type of verbiage that is used. So here's what I think it is, to summarize it. This vision at the end of Ezekiel is a symbolic ideal. And I think what it is doing is using the temple imagery, the priestly imagery, and the land allotments as a way of conveying not only hope for the people that are in exile, but the hope of the world as well. And that is, there is a God who is still um, working out his purposes on earth. And heaven and earth meet together in the person of Jesus Christ, as we know it, because as we look back on it, we see how it comes together in Christ. But in Ezekiel's day, it's this idea of a connecting point with God, that this is a vision of how people and God come back together. And that is the glory of God, is him being in a loving relationship with the people that he has created in his own image. So here's my final thoughts on this study. Number one, prophetic literature is probably some of the most challenging to interpret. And the most challenging prophets to interpret are, number one, Ezekiel. His book is the most difficult one to interpret. But as hopefully you've seen, you can meditate on it and reflect upon some of these parables and sign acts and different things like that as a way of gaining wisdom. Number two, Ezekiel is demonstrating a faithful response to God's calling upon his life. And he lives out that through the parable of his own life as an embodied message to his people. And then number three, I think the book of Ezekiel is inviting those of us who are Gentiles to walk about inside the story of Israel and to consider the height and breadth and width of God's love toward his people, and understanding that God is doing the same with us as well. When we come up against challenging times, when we think that God has left or abandoned us, or we're being punished for some reason, we come back to this and we are reminded again and again that God's ultimate desire is to dwell among us and be with us. And we're going to have a tough time doing that at times, because um, as much as we want things to continue to go unheeded, and it rarely does in this life. We'd like to have things go unhindered. It rarely does in this life. This Sunday morning is Palm Sunday. And when we look at it through the lens of Jesus' own life was coming to an end, it was winding down. There was a sacred ending that was happening in his own life. It is a reminder that God walks with us through those endings that most of us resist. But where there is an ending, there's also a new beginning. There is the potential of resurrection, which then leads us into Easter. So that's where I want to finish with the book of Ezekiel. I'm going to stop our recording and we'll see if we have any other thoughts that we'd like to talk about. Okay. I didn't pause it yet. Hold on a second here. Okay. So our recording has stopped, and just wanted to see what your thoughts are on this particular section or in the book as a whole. Now you see why you don't hear many sermons from the book of Ezekiel. It's a challenging book for sure. Any thoughts that come to your mind? Well, you won't get a more difficult biblical study than Ezekiel, unless it's perhaps Leviticus. So that's another tough one. But you know, we did it. We did something that most people will never do, is actually get their nose into the text of Ezekiel and see its contribution to the life story of Israel. Some thoughts? Anything?
So did they ever rebuild the temple like before? I know they knocked down Solomon's, but I mean,
Yes. The answer to your question is yes. So when they get back in to the city, this story is told in Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay. So
okay.
those are post exilic books. They come back, they begin to clear away the rubble as you do where there's been destruction, and they begin to rebuild the city and rebuild the walls around the city. And they do put up a temple, but they
Mhm.
don't have the resources for it to match Solomon's temple.
Yeah.
And so they build this small rinky dink temple. I don't mean that in a facetious way. I'm
Well,
just
just a
saying in
small.
comparison. And the people begin to complain. Of course they do.
Hmm.
And that's what the book of Haggai is all about, the Old Testament prophet Haggai, talking about, the people being dismayed that the glory of the Solomon temple is gone, and he's trying to encourage the people and so forth. So fast forward through the silent years between Old and New Testament. Again, that's a misnomer. There's a lot that happens in those 400
Oh
years.
yeah.
But you come to the New Testament and you have a rebuilding of the temple, and it is subsidized by Herod. And the Herodian temple is what it's called. It's also called sometimes the second temple,
Hmm.
and it becomes a massive building project. But in many ways it is political in nature because
Yeah.
that second temple Judaism allows the Romans to keep a close eye on the Jewish people because there's fortresses on each side of that new temple area, and actually um, they the people of Israel were always under the watchful eye of the Roman soldiers and so forth.
Hmm.
And the people hated that. They absolutely hated that. And that's why they were longing for the Messiah, and they're disappointed that Jesus is not a military Messiah because they'd love to get rid of the Romans. So
Yeah.
to answer your question, Beth, Solomon's temple is destroyed. They build a smaller temple, and it is in nothing in comparison.
Yeah.
Herod comes along and he begins this massive building project. And so by the time you get to the ministry of Jesus, John chapter 2, the disciples are walking through the temple area with Jesus. And
Hmm.
they're looking at the walls and they're looking at this massive temple that has been built and paid for by Jewish taxes, but also by
Yeah.
Herod's plans. And the disciples go, "Look at this temple. Look how massive it is. It's overwhelming." And
Hmm.
Jesus says, "Hey, tear this down and I will rebuild it in 3 days." Do you remember that passage
Yeah. Yeah.
in John? And they're going, "Are you crazy? This has taken
Yeah.
years and years and years to build, and you're going to rebuild it in 3 days?" But what he's done is he's changed the image. He's not
Yeah.
talking about the physical, he's talking about his own resurrection, three
Yeah.
days in the grave and resurrection. And so he's using kind of uh, a double way of talking there
Yeah.
to redirect. This is not what's important anymore. What's important is I am your Messiah, and through me, I will rebuild the temple of people, Jews and
Hmm.
Gentiles and so forth. Um, so that's kind of a quick survey, but it's fascinating.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
it's destroyed in 70 AD,
Yeah, it is destroyed in 70 AD by Titus, the Roman general.
but it was not rebuilt after that then.
No, the only portion, as I've never been to the Holy Land, some of you can speak to this a lot better than I can.
Yeah.
Um, I think the only portion that remains standing, as far as my knowledge goes, is the Wailing Wall.
Yeah.
That is still standing. Okay, the rest of it was destroyed. I don't know if there are other smaller portions of it, artifacts from that were left standing from 70 AD or not. Does anybody know that?
I don't know, but they have
Yeah,
the wall is divided into two sections, one for men and one for women.
yeah, yeah. But my point is that's
Yeah,
all that's left
that's all
standing as
that's
far as I
there.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's nothing else.
Yeah. So, anyways, is there talk among Jewish people that would they like to have a temple rebuilt? Yes. But here's where that eschatology comes in. But they can't rebuild until they get the exact place where the temple is to be rebuilt. And right now, the Dome of the Rock is standing on that. And so
Oh,
you have all this discussion about that needs to be destroyed and taken out of the way so a new temple can be built and so forth. Again, that is built a lot upon going back to the 1970s, the Hal Lindsey approach to prophecy type thing that
yeah.
has lingered on for all these years in different circles. But but that is still a discussion among
Yeah.
certain circles for sure.
And it's also supposed to be the rock where Abraham sacrificed Isaac.
Right, right. See,
So
you could lead us on a tour, Beth.
yeah, well, I'm not going over there now.
No, I wouldn't either.
It was scary enough when I went.
What
When
year did you go?
77.
Well, that was
But when they were running through the airport, the soldiers chasing somebody with bayonets, I'm like, ah! Am I going to get shot? Am I going to just die here with, is the Lord coming, whatever? I'm like,
well,
woo.
that was a turbulent time in the
Oh, it
70s. It
wasn't.
really was. I mean,
And
yeah.
when we were on the boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, you could hear the shooting over in the other side. It was like, oh, that's
Yeah,
nice.
yeah, really. Oh boy. Yeah.
So,
Any other insights on that at all? Who
How do
else has
you know
been to
what?
the Holy Land? Bud and Shelley, you have any other insights that you have from that?
How do you know when something is symbolic versus real?
Well, number one, when you look at this here, the symbolism is often found in not just the overall vision, but scholars begin to look and go, okay, these are all these measurements are in multiple of 5. 25 is being emphasized. Why is that? So these questions become, there's literary clues that scholars look for and they go, okay, this makes sense because it's trying to do this or that. It's a lot harder for us because number one, we didn't live then. Number two, the Western mindset is very literal. It has a hard time appreciating symbolism. I mean, that's different than reading fiction,
Mhm.
obviously, which is a good story that's made up. But symbolism, even things that we see, what is this portraying, and what is the author trying to say? Now, people who are into art, people who are artistic can appreciate that. And so you go into a museum and you go, oh, that's a nice painting. Whereas another person goes, oh, look at the blending of color. Look at what was put into the picture. Why was that put into the picture? And was that trying to communicate something? And so it's an art. It really is
Mhm.
an art to be able to spot some of that stuff and know what the history is behind the artist and why he or she painted that painting or wrote that song. I find it, because I love music, I find it fascinating to hear some of the backdrop of what inspired artists to write what they wrote a lot of times in
Yeah.
a song. And then it makes sense. You go, oh, now I see the symbolism that is being used makes sense because I know the backstory to it. But where before you go, what is he? Why did he write that song the way he
Yeah.
did? That doesn't,
Yeah.
taken literally, it's kind of goofy. So I don't know. It's an art. It really is. Yeah. Anything else? All righty. Well, we'll close shop and we'll take next week off. We'll start something new 2 weeks from tonight. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.